Right. 4 February 2026. And today I'm excited to be giving you the evening update. And in these next 6 months, I'm going to be working on the AFM University. We're going to be setting up one of the biggest universities that is based on employment creation. So the purpose of the AFM University is to create jobs within the AFM. And the AFM, as I've defined it for you, covers almost 10 million Zimbabweans. It's not a small church, it's a huge church. It is the historical church that covers every single church in Zimbabwe. So we're not talking about the AFM in Zimbabwe or the AFM of Zimbabwe or the AFM International or the AFM South Africa or the AFM in all its other variations. What we're talking about and what I've been defining for you is a broader body that starts back in 1915. In fact, it starts in 1906 when there was a revival at the United States. So in the United States of America, and that is at Azusa Street. That is what I've been explaining to you, that the AFM is one. It starts in one place. Every religious body in Zimbabwe, in fact, the majority of the religious bodies in Zimbabwe start at one street. And that is what I've been explaining. However, today I want to take you through the AFM as it stands right now, as it is widely known, how it came to be what it is right now, who were the leaders of the AFM. We've looked at the history, the early history of the AFM, and the person who came to Zimbabwe with religion other than the missionaries. We named that person as Charles Manamela. And I've seen that there are variations of that name, such as Zephaniah, but the name I know is Charles Manamela. So Manamela is the person who brought religion to Zimbabwe. Before that, religion was organized by the missionaries. So the missionaries came to Zimbabwe with religion. And that is the Catholics, the Anglicans, the Salvation Army. All these people came to Zimbabwe. They came with different paths. However, the one path that is with the majority of Zimbabweans is the AFM. The AFM is the original church of Zimbabwe. And it came in through two paths. The path of the missionaries from Norway, and then the path of Manamela, who came from South Africa, after the breakup of the AFM in South Africa. In South Africa, there was a breakup of the AFM over ideology, the ideology of oneness, which is to say only Jesus. So if you look at the AFM in Zimbabwe right now, they talk of only Jesus. And then if you look at the traditional AFM, which was there at that time, it was looking at the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So the split happened, and Edward Mabuyane in 1925 split and formed the Zion Apostolic Church. The Zion Apostolic Church then split, and there was a Zimbabwean man here who formed Mugodi Apostolic Church. That is Bishop T.L. Mugodi. So AFM, Mugodi, one church. So one church, and then we had a lot of other people that came out of the AFM after Manamela came to Zimbabwe. People who inspired by Manamela include Apostle, let me get this name correct, James Jekenishon Chikonamombe. So James Jekenishon Chikonamombe went and formed Majekenishon or Shamiso Apostolic Faith Church. Then out of these other churches, we have the ZCC, which was formed by Mutendi. We then have Masowe, Prophet Joan Masowe. In 1932, he was inspired by Manamela. We then have Stephen Kundishora, Petros Mfurutsa, who also split from the AFM and formed the Apostolic Faith Mission in Mwana. So Apostolic Faith Mission in Mwana was formed by these two. And then, as I said, we've got Bishop Paul Maja, who was later on inspired. But everyone started by Manamela. So in Zimbabwe, all religion starts with Manamela. So now we've finished this portion the AFM is now entirely divided into two. That is the missionaries who are in Harare, and then people who worked with Manamela from Gwanda. Manamela, because of his work in Gwanda, Sunday then created most of the branches of the AFM, and these people worked around Bulawayo and formed the traditional, or what you can call the African side of the AFM. So there were two sides: the missionary-led AFM, which was in Harare, and then in Bulawayo we had the AFM of the Africans. So up to 1996, the AFM was split into two, with the missionaries in Harare and the Africans in Bulawayo. And they only joined in 1997 when Madzire, that is Rev Ashfa Madzire, became the overall president of the AFM, which combined both the white AFM and the black AFM. So the first time that the AFM was one church was in 1997. So that is when the church became one church. I could be having the dates wrong, because in 2006, that's when Madzire became president. So I do not know how that worked. But in 1997, there was a conference where the two AFMs were combined. So that is the reunification of the AFM with one president. Previously, there was a missionary side and the African side. So now let's go to 1980. And I want to go to 1980 because this is where it is very important. So this is where part two starts. So now part two starts. So in 1980, we had Kupara. So Kupara is the most important figure in the AFM. So Reverend Langton Kupara, in 1980, he started to lead the AFM in Zimbabwe. So at that particular moment, it was still a daughter association of South Africa. So AFM was a daughter association of South Africa. Reverend Kupara became the leader because he had powers. So he had spiritual powers. And he was a group of people called Vavangeri. So these are people who were not trained. They were not trained, but they had powerful spiritual powers. They used to lead revivals. So Rev Kupara, from 1983 to 1987, he became the first black leader of the AFM at national level. Remember, this is the African side. The European side was in Harare. Rev Kupara was the president of the African side, which was based in Bulawayo. And then in 1987, Rev Mvenge became the president at the death of Rev Kupara. So that is Rev Mvenge. Mvenge became the president, or he became a president from a superintendent. He was a superintendent, then he became a president. In 1996 to 2003, Rev Stephen Mutemererwa became the president of the AFM. He was an uncompromising Pentecostal father figure, and there was emphasis on evangelism. So he was an evangelist who went around a lot planting in Masvingo. So what happened is, because AFM was in Harare, the black AFM worked in Bulawayo, in Masvingo, but they did not do or have a big presence in areas around Shavane where the ZCC had planted. So the ZCC had planted inside of Shavane. So mostly Shavane was strong in terms of ZCC. And up north in Harare, the Jeke Nation of Shamiso had planted. So the AFM was not strong there. The church that was strong in those rural areas was the Jeke Nation. Also in Manicaland, Jeke Nation was very strong. So these are AFM churches that had grown out of the AFM in Zimbabwe. In 2003, Rev Enos Manyika became the president of the AFM. Manyika was a very powerful figure. He was a preacher and a charismatic figure in the AFM. That is Manyika. And when Manyika came, Manyika only lasted 3 years. During the time of Manyika, there was a lot of politics in the AFM due to attempts to reorganize the AFM. So there were attempts to reorganize the AFM. And Zimbabwe was going through a crisis, a political and economic crisis. And therefore, the AFM was also undergoing a political and economic crisis. This is the rise of Madziri. Madziri Asfa was at that time the pastor of AFM, Bulawayo Central. So at that time, in 2003, when Manyika was the president of the AFM, Madziri was the president or was the pastor at AFM, Bulawayo Central. At the same time, Makandiwa was a student of Rev Madziri. So the two most powerful people that you know at that time were together. So the growth of the AFM and the split of the AFM came from the two powerful figures at that time. That is Makandiwa and the younger pastors coming out of the crisis. And tomorrow I'll do a part 3 on the crisis. They started to feel disoriented and wanted to leave. And then there was the traditional side led by Madziri. Madziri was a very powerful organizer and a negotiator. So because Madziri was the first president of both the white AFM and the black AFM, he had to negotiate. He also had to set up the external assemblies, which were in the European countries or in the diaspora. The Zimbabwe diaspora started to grow. And therefore, Madziri had access to a lot of resources. He had access to a lot of influence. And he decided to stay in power forever. So Madziri was the first person to want to stay in power in the AFM forever. He decided to change the constitution of the AFM, and he became the longest serving member or president of the AFM from 2006 to 2018. He continuously postponed elections until there was a court challenge or a split. The split came from the way that the constitution of the AFM had been structured. So when the two churches were reunified, that is the white AFM, the missionary AFM or AFM, and the black AFM, it was set in stone that the deputy of the president would automatically become the president of the church. So that is why there was a split in the AFM, and that split happened in 2018, when Madao and Chiangwa became president of two different factions of the AFM. That is after Kosam Chiangwa took Madziri to court, and Madziri lost at court. And then after he lost at court, Madziri supported Madao, and we have the current situation that we have right now, where the AFM has been split into two churches, that the AFM in Zimbabwe and the AFM of Zimbabwe. So the split came because Madao, who was supported by Madziri, then said, even though Chiangwa won in court, they were not going to accept his victory. And then we had the constitutionalists and the traditionalists inside of the AFM. So the constitutionalists of the AFM said elections must be held and the president of the AFM must rotate. However, you see that both of these presidents are not rotating. So I think I finished with the AFM of Zimbabwe, AFM in Zimbabwe, AFM International, AFM South Africa. There are so many branches of the AFM. But what I wanted you to understand is that the AFM is a church that is bigger than an individual. There is no Zimbabwean that formed it. Zimbabweans were inspired by external forces or external people. There is no Zimbabwean who ever went to the United States to actually go and sit at Azusa and was at the revival. So John Gilek, who was in South Africa, inspired Manamela. Manamela came to Zimbabwe and he inspired all the churches that you know that are in Zimbabwe. But the churches had complaints. So the people that formed the churches had complaints. The reason why they left was because, firstly, there was a discrimination within the church. So the missionaries did not allow a black person to become a leader. So you were not allowed to become a leader if you're black. So there were protest movements. So Joanne Masowe is a protest movement. Chisamiso AFM is a protest movement. Jekanishan, that is Chisamiso. I like Jekanishan because it makes me laugh. So what Jekanishan do is when they're praying for you, they use water. So they splash you with water. They grab a demon, so they become possessed, and they jump up onto the roof, and they grab the demon and they roll around with it. They carry heavy drums, and they beat those drums. So the reason why Jekanishan is called Jekanishan is Jackson. So his name is, they turned the word Jackson into Jekanishan. The reason why Jekanishan formed that church is he said a black person will never believe in a spirit that they can't see. So he left the church to create something that will be followed by black people, ordinary black people. Mutendi uses water to splash you. He takes an injection and he jabs you. So if you go to Mutendi and you've got a lump, he's going to take a big injection and he's going to jab you. And then he say, you're going to be healed. Mutendi has got a hierarchical structure like a king. He collects money through tax. So he taxes his members. So every member of the ZCC pays tax, and that tax goes to Mutendi, and everything is owned by Mutendi. Joanne, which son, does not believe in working. He does not believe in hospitals, does not believe in children, girls going to school. So what they did, the Joanne Masowe Shan, they took the culture of a black person and said, we don't want this culture to be changed. But what we're going to add is working with your hands. So they created their own type of school where a young boy does not go to school. He wakes up and he learns how to make a dish. He learns how to fix things and so forth. So these churches were addressing things that are lacking in the AFM, the original AFM, which did not understand the local culture. That is why you see that when Manamela arrived in Zimbabwe, everyone ran away from the AFM or the original AFM. And that original AFM no longer exists. It does not exist because it does not resonate or did not resonate with the Zimbabweans or the Zimbabwean beliefs. So Zimbabweans have got a certain type of belief. You will never be able to change the Zimbabweans. Zimbabweans are like that. They have got a certain way of thinking. So Zimbabweans like different things. Particularly, Zimbabweans like a strong leader. So Zimbabweans like a strong leader. They want a visible leader. That is why you see that people like Chamisa are very powerful. They are visible. They are strong. They do what they want. That is the kind of leader that Zimbabweans want. They don't want a leader that is going to come and consult and ask. And therefore, that's why you see there's been a rise of many different sects or factions within the AFM. Whereas, if you go to Zayoja, it has always been one because the strong leader is there. If you go to Makandoa's church, he's there. If you go to Magaya's church, he's there. So Zimbabweans like a church where there is a strong leader, a powerful leader who does not consult. And what you're seeing right now with Madao and Chiangwa, Madao and Chiangwa, they are not strong leaders. They are not present leaders. So if you ask someone, have you ever seen Chiangwa or have you ever seen Madao? They struggle to see or to remember what these guys have said. That is because they didn't centralize power. So right now, as you speak, the AFM does not have centralized power. The power has been decentralized. And there's a big danger that the AFM will totally disintegrate because the two factions and the two leaders don't have a specific power. They don't have specific charisma. So how did Madzire get charisma? You would ask me, how did Madzire get charisma? Madzire got charisma because he was never at the church. So at his own church, he was never there. Every day, Madzire would go to a different church or branch. He also used to call and invite pastors to preach at his assembly, and he was known across. Madzire also moved the head office of the church, the AFM, from Harare to Bulawayo. That means all the pastors now had to come to Madzire and to Bulawayo, and that removed the center of power from Harare to Bulawayo. The center of power was at Harare, and Madzire then became strong by calling to himself all the pastors of the AFM that way in all these different places. However, the AFM became very weak in the raw areas, and that is why you see that other churches, for example, ZCC, Joan Masowe, they are very strong in the raw areas, whereas his own church, the AFM, is very weak within those raw areas. So that is the definition of the AFM as a structure. It started off as two, the African leg, and then we had the European or mission leg, which came from Norway, and then the African side, which became a child of the South African side of the AFM. So the two splits brought about the AFM that you know right now, and then the other churches that came out of the AFM, the broader AFM, which came out with all the people that I've named, Mutendi, Mugodi, Jekonishan, all these people that I named, Johanne Masowe, all those people came out of the AFM. A black person did not know religion. They knew how to follow a structure where they could not become leaders. And this structure that came out was a structure of rebellion or of freeing oneself. That is why the churches became the way that they are right now. So what are we trying to solve? Don't forget what we're trying to solve. We're trying to solve a problem. The problem is that the problem of Zimbabwe, which is the economic crisis and the political crisis, can be directly linked and traced back to what happened in the AFM. The AFM is a representation of the Zimbabwean society. Zimbabweans cannot create jobs. So Zimbabweans cannot create big companies. They fail when it comes to creating big companies. Churches where there are so many people, they still don't have money. So if you go to any church, any AFM church, and say, let's see your bank balance, they don't have bank balance. They live on donations. So they have to wait for the end of the month to say, did you pay Chegumi? If you pay Chegumi, did you pay your offering? That is how the church is still organized right now. If you go to big, rich churches, they don't live like that. They've got funders inside the church. Someone who can take $1 million and put it there and say, let's build. Someone who can take 2 million and say, let's build. The AFM lacks that. The ZCC is a little bit better because they pay tax. So in the ZCC, they pay tax. They've got a tax structure where every person pays $10 a month. It doesn't matter how rich you are. It doesn't matter how poor you are. You pay $10 every month. Your pastor is going to collect $10 and they will send it to Mutendi. And whether you like it or not, you're going to pay that $10. It's your duty. Johanne Masowe, they don't have that structure. They worship outside. They don't care about money. And therefore, they're a very poor church. And then if you keep going, Jack Nation has collapsed. I think basically they've got a small group left of people that just beat their drums. I can keep going and going, but the difference with the AFM is that it is the most engaged church. So I'm talking about the AFM in Zimbabwe and the AFM of Zimbabwe, together with the Zayoja and together with the UFI. Those churches are very engaged. They're engaged because they've got a younger population. There's got nostalgia of people that have grown up in the church. People like myself, when we grew up, our parents were not going to church. So they started to go to church because of the evangelism which took place in the AFM. What am I talking about when I talk of evangelism? I want to take you to Vavangeri. So when I talk of Vavangeri, Vavangeri are people who started with video and audio tapes. So there are people who did audio and video tapes who would then distribute these audio tapes, and people who are in the bar. So someone who is in the bar will sit there and suddenly they will hear a voice in a radio, in a cassette. You will be inside a combi and you hear the cassette. And those people who are preaching with the cassette are what we call Vangeli or the evangelist. So I can name for you Ezra Chidembo. He was the first person in Masvingo and Midland. So when you're in a bus and they're waiting for a bus to leave, the Chidembo will be preaching. Then you've got Rev Richard Sevilla. Sevilla will be sitting there. You'll be sitting in a bus or in a combi, and Sevilla will start preaching for you, AFM. And then you've got Fano Mbiriri, and then you've got Fano Kwatidzo, and PB Machazi. But my favorite, that everyone knows, and this one you all know, there is no one who doesn't know Chiweshe. So Chiweshe became one of the most powerful figures in Zimbabwe. His sermons and his crusades became so popular, and the AFM grew and grew and grew. So there's no one who doesn't know Chiweshe, and Makandiwa was inspired by Chiweshe. He started to create video and audio tapes, and this is something that was never, that Madziri never managed to do. So the people in the original structure of the church, the pastors, did not create video tapes and audio tapes. The people that created audio tapes then preached to a wider audience, and their religious views grew broader than the AFM. So I'm just trying to show you how this whole thing grew and where we are right now, why the AFM as a church split so many times. It has split numerous times to a point where you don't even remember where you started, how it started, where it is. It is very difficult, but I hope that I have managed to bring everything together for you, starting in 1906, 1915, and then Zimbabwe, where Manamela arrived in 1923 up to 1927. And then the growth of the church, starting with Mutendi and looking at all the other guys that I've shown you, who also split from the original AFM, and then up to Kupara. Kupara became the biggest figure because, unlike the others, Kupara decided not to leave the AFM. So when people like Jackie Nishan left, Kupara stayed. And he said, we are going to make changes in the AFM, but we're not going to leave. So he was a loyalist and he stayed within the AFM. So the father of AFM in Zimbabwe, as it is known right now, is Kupara, because he decided to stay. He decided not to leave. Otherwise, he was going to go and form his own church. But he's the last person who said, I'm not going to leave the AFM. I'm going to stay inside of the AFM. So what is the future? And I want to start with what is lacking. So at the moment, the AFM lacks power. So I'm saying, using the word AFM because I don't want to say AFM, international AFM, this AFM of, I don't want to say that. So I hope that there's some student pastors from Living Waters watching, so that you look back and say, did GAMBAKWE explain this properly? So remember what happened to the AFM. Abel Sunday, after being inspired by Manamela, was the godfather of the AFM in Matabeleland. So with one person, and then that one person grew many assemblies. And then with people like Kupara, who stayed in Masvingo and Zaka, particularly in the Zaka area. So now we have the AFM that is based in Harare, with Chiangwa in Madao. What is going to happen is that these two guys are going to leave. And unfortunately, the split has happened. So there is now a problem over properties. So the people that are coming are going to fight over property. And eventually, each assembly and each pastor will have their own little assembly. So you are going to end up with a little assembly. And I foresee a disintegration, because the AFM that is there now is not a spiritual church. It's a church of economy. How do I get as much as possible? So there are factions, two factions of the AFM. However, the owners of the church are still very strong. So people inside the church, they're very strong. And these people are the ones that need the solution that I'm talking about now, which is a university. How do you create employment? And to create employment by creating a different center from the church. So you don't need the church to create employment. You want people to do well. Once people do well, they are able to create their own structure. So the church will revive. If you create a university, but not a traditional university, you create businesses, and those businesses need to link back to life. So you need to go back and link the original link that Mandela made, which is to solve the problems of the day. We need to solve the problem of the day. And let me show you what we're looking at right now. We've got a list of businesses right now. I've got about 500 types of businesses that we want to create in the AFM. But we're not going to create them in church. We're going to create them through a university. So I'm just going to quickly scroll for you so that you can see where this is going. This is going to be massive. The AFM university is going to be big. And it's going to be the biggest university that you've ever seen. You're going to make so much money, going to create so much wealth. And it will be the biggest structure in the whole of Zimbabwe. The country is on the verge of a different direction. And that is because we have reached a different day in Zimbabwe. We have reached a period where the younger generation now need to take over. If you don't take over now, the country will be taken by other people, by strangers. So let's look at some of the businesses. And I'm going to share this with you guys. We're working on the app right now. So currently we're looking at agriculture. So we are going to create businesses in agriculture, services, in retail, manufacturing, digital, construction, transport, hospitality, health and wellness, education, finance, high growth areas, mining, oil and energy, consumer, industrialists, telecoms, and obviously the new emerging businesses. So what we're going to have is a university that starts with you having the business. And then once you have the business, we cascade back and we have the university. So the university will arise after of the successful areas. So let's say we're doing macadamia farming. That's an example. Or we're doing real estate. First, we're going to have the macadamia business or the real estate. And we're going to build houses and we're going to build structures. You're going to have somewhere to live. And then you go and create the university. So eventually the university will come up. But what will start is the business. So we're going to gather all the people that are interested in real estate. At the moment, when we speak of real estate, how many buildings has the AFM built? How many malls does the AFM own? So I'm not talking about the AFM as the current one. So don't forget that I'm talking about a broader structure. So how many of those have you built? None. So if we create a focus group for real estate, then we say, okay, now we have 500 units of housing. Now we can go back to the university and we'll start working on our faculty. How do we make sure that this becomes big and sustainable? If you look at New York, it's huge. However, come back to South Africa. They have never been able to build anything ever since the white people left. So when the white people left, and as they leave, everything is collapsing. Why is that? It's the lack of formalization. So the purpose of the university is to formalize. So that is to formalize, to take something that is informal and make it formal. Eventually, you have a proper business model, but you need people that can continue to grow. And growth is what has been lacking right now in Africa and in Zimbabwe. That is why you see that everything that we do is about fighting over the small cake that we've got. So the biggest fight in Zimbabwe right now is that the cake is not growing. Everyone wants to jump onto leadership so that they can steal as much as possible and take that little that is there. They don't know how to grow what is not there. So to imagine a new thing. So that is why you need the AFM University. And I hope that as time goes on, it becomes clearer and clearer where we're going. You need to raise funds. You need to be able to raise funds. You need to say, this year, we want to build more and do the more. And then your people will start going into retail and those people will start giving money to the church. And your church no longer depends on chegumi or on offerings or on donations. And then you start having a structure, a business structure in agriculture, in construction, in retail, in hotels, and your church become extremely big, like the Catholics. The Catholics even have a country. So they have a country where they come from, where their Pope lives. And the Pope knows that business is taken care of because there's a structure and a solid structure. So the university is critical. You cannot operate without a university if you are a structure. And I'm talking here about the total reunification of the whole original AFM of Mandamela. By the time we get to 10 years, everyone should be back here. We should be having an ideology. We should be having values. And our people, the children that are going to live, must know where they come from. They must not become directionless. You saw what is happening now, where 1 billion people have viewed this young girl, a young Zimbabwean. 1 billion people have gone to view her. She's got nothing to offer, but 1 billion people have gone there. There are so many things happening in Zimbabwe right now, so many important things. Right now, we're talking here. I've got 55 people here with me. We're talking something that can transform the whole country. And yet you've got 55 people. But someone that is going to remove their clothes will get 1 billion views in 5 days. That is the current nature of our country right now as we speak. We've got no ideology. And our children that are going to live are going to be exposed to drugs. They're going to be exposed to all sorts of things. Some of them don't even know how to build a house. They won't know how to build. And they can sell the country for 2 rands. They'll be able to sell the country for 2 rands. Okay, I think I've talked a lot. Let us not forget why we started this. We started this so that you can understand what the problem is. The problem in our country is not just political. It is economic. It is social. It is a productivity problem. We are not able to create jobs. And that is why the AFM needs a university. And I think I've made the case here. Then I've also described why people left the AFM. People wanted to respond to the spiritual needs of the people, the traditional needs of the people, the cultural needs of the people. People needed to respond to justice and injustice. So that is why the AFM was formed. And then people needed power. So people want a powerful preacher like Chiwesh. People want a spiritual prophet like Makandiwa. People want an organizer like Madziri. So Madziri had many followers. He was one of the biggest organizers and negotiators ever seen in the AFM. And of course, there was the builder, Kupara, the person that made the AFM stay the way it was. Otherwise, we would have left with everyone and gone. But he decided to stay within the AFM in Zimbabwe and make sure that the church transitioned from 2 to 1. So we have a lot that we need to cover, but it cannot be done without an ideological center or a university. You need a university, and that is lacking. And you cannot compare the university you want to set up with, for example, let's say, take for example, Solusi University. Solusi University is a traditional university. Zayoga has got a university, Zego. You cannot compare with what we want to set up. They're just a traditional university. It's like any other university. You go there, you learn, you get a degree, you go to school, you go and look for work. We don't want that. When you get into our university, the day you get in, you start your business, you start running your business, and then we are going to take you back to learn the culture, the approach which we want. But you're not going to go there and study first. You're going to go there and start your business first. It's been 40 minutes. GAMBAKWE can speak, man. GAMBAKWE can speak for hours. So I've talked for 40 minutes. I need to stop now. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow, 5 a.m. We are inspired after the 30-day fast. So from the 1st of January to the 30th, we did have a fast. And many of you joined me. I'd like to thank all of the people that joined. We've got a big job ahead of us. And one thing I don't want you guys to do is to struggle. I don't want you to worry about where you're going to get your next meal. I don't want you to struggle with joblessness, not knowing where you're going to work. I don't want you to worry about the children. What is going to happen to children when you're gone? I don't want you to struggle and worry about your future and the people you're leaving behind. We've got so much ahead that needs to be done. But the path has been clear. It has shown us the mistakes that have been made and where we need to solve. Let's look at the comments. That is the church I was born and brought up in. I know all those people you're talking about. So sad about what happened. Thank you very much, Auntie. GAMBAKWE aka broker. Yes, aka broker. GAMBAKWE. Auperere Zidzoro. Yes, Zidzoro. GAMBAKWE Zidzoro. Zidzoro is AFM in Zimbabwe and AFM of Zimbabwe. Those are Zidzoro. If you want to know Zidzoro, it's two people with the same ideology. Madao and Chiangwa. They've got no difference of ideology, but they're still split. You ask them, why are you splitting? why is Madao and Chiangwa not working together? Because of a constitution. If the church could reunite under Madzire, why can't the two sides unite? And why is that our pastors lack power? Which pastor in the AFM right now, do you know? That has got power. Like, if you want a demon to be removed, where do you go? If you want someone to preach for you, if you want someone to make you wealthy, like the pastors, like Madzire. Madzire was not a prophet, but Madzire had some of the wealthiest people in his church at that time. Like literally, he was known that if he preaches for you, you are going to live there where you're going and come up with ideas. So Madzire was one of the most powerful people. I know Madzire myself because I watched him for almost 3 years. I watched Madzire. And what he did, he raised people, many people. If you look at Manyika, who didn't know that Manyika was an imposing figure? So Manyika, if he arrived somewhere, you would even be afraid of him. He was such a big organizer. Manyika was a big organizer. Kupara, who doesn't know Kupara? Who doesn't know how powerful he was as a figure in the AFM? He was the source of prophecy. He was the source, even presidents used to go over there to ask what is going to happen. So we are coming from a rich church, a rich heritage, a rich spiritual heritage that has been replaced by students or people that have graduated, people with a master's in theology, but with no spiritual powers. You cannot be pastor in the AFM without spiritual powers. It's not possible. You must have spiritual powers. Even GAMBAKWE has got spiritual powers. And you are a pastor and you don't have spiritual powers. You have never fasted and you're a pastor. Like, literally the pastors in the AFM right now, who are WhatsApping girls, like sitting there and like, how are you? Today is so hot. There are pastors right now as we speak who are WhatsApping girls at church. They are known that they got a group following them. There are pastors who are known that the only reason they go to church is to collect their monthly rent. So we don't want to talk about the current AFM. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the big thing that was set up by Manamela. Manamela came to Zimbabwe and set up the history of all religion in our country. If you know any religious church or sect, you can 99% of the time connect it and trace it back to Manamela. Someone that did not form a church. He went to a place, he didn't form a church, he did the revival after revival after revival. And when he left, he created this big thing that we need to now formalize through a university. Right, thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I'll see you tomorrow morning. And remember, you can be part of everything. Don't be just a spectator. I know some of you are watching me here. You've got multiple resources, abilities. Become part of what we want to form. Let us make our church the most powerful creator of employment. Not one person, not two people. Let's have thousands of millionaires. I've given you the list of businesses. There are more. Let us make sure that our church becomes the wealthiest church ever. And that starts with the university. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning. And thank you for your support. I can't do it without you. And everything I have in my house is from here. I don't have any other source. It's from you guys. That is how I make a living. I would like to thank all of you for watching and a good night. See you.